Hello, it's October 24th, 2016. I'm Tony Smario, coming to you from my dad, BroSal.org YouTube channel, and this is World War III this week. There's so much been going on that I thought I've got some notes here about what I think all the news amounts to. But let me just take you first this week, since I always do too much commentary and perhaps not enough noticing of the material. So I just want to go through the line of headlines that I have that I've been collecting over the last couple of weeks, really, and longer at one point. But I want to just run through those and then talk to you about where I think this is all heading right now. First one I've got is all the way back from the 4th by Michael Rubin of Newsweek. And it says, "Is the imminent defeat of ISIS the end of Islam?" With a byline that says, "Even if ISIS is crushed, any celebration should be short-lived." You know, that's great news, right? And of course they're pointing out that the people that were part of ISIS are then going to go back to their countries like France or England or Germany or Africa, any of these other countries that they came out from to join ISIS, and start cells there, continue the ideology in spite of the defeat. They lost the battle, but they'll never lose the war kind of idea. So we're already being set up for this imminent enemy that can't be defeated, even though when this whole thing first started, I was one of the few people saying, why don't we round up these guys, if they're such a threat to the world. We didn't let Saddam Hussein get away with his weapons of mass destruction. We didn't let Gaddafi get away with harming his own people. We didn't let Assad get away with using chemical weapons. All our cover stories on the surface. Taliban, they don't treat their women right, so we got to go destroy that country for 15 years. And yet these people, we were promised when they first came out, all the propaganda, that they're just savages, they're cutting heads off and they want to take over the whole Middle East. And yet we just kept promoting that, sort of sending them weapons and guns until they had swaths of territory in a couple of these big cities. Who knows how much control they ever had in these cities. I've yet to see an interview from any human being that lives in those cities talking about, giving any real body to the story, except as like a Hollywood script that we've never seen. We've only seen some of the scenes, but we can't even put the whole movie together because, we haven't seen enough of the footage, right? We don't know the characters, who's really been involved over there, who's been, fighting for their life and who's been running for their life. All we get is this report of refugees and such. So anyway, they're already been telling us a month before the election that the imminent defeat of ISIS. First they were unstoppable. What are we going to do? Then let's not do anything because there's too many political red herrings. Somehow ISIS winds up with all of, guns and weapons and support that come from allies, NATO allies, if not straight from, Zionist-funded, sources in America. And next thing you know, we're backpedaling. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We can't even keep a 60-mile area of a safe zone on the border with Turkey when that was all going on. It's like they had the upper hand. They've even got the upper hand in defeat. This is really something to pay attention to, you guys. So anyway, the imminent defeat of ISIS, the end of Islam, is Islamism, it actually says. Is it the end of Islamism? Which is really odd. Why would it be the end of Islamism? He goes on to talk about it being the end of this radicalized take over the world through their caliphate and pointing out that can't end. They still believe they should do that. None of these journalists bother to bring into account someone like Sheikh Imran Hossein, a scholar of Islam, pointing out that all of this is bogus, and all of their scholarship that supports their contribution with NATO weapons and International Monetary Fund loans, puppet governments. All of that makes for a bogus jihad. You can't pretend you're really fighting the oppressor on behalf of Allah and Islam when you're really taking money from the oppressor to fight the oppressor's proxy wars. So that's, out there from very easy to see that angle, but you won't catch it in our media, which is very telling if you're paying attention to both sides, as I'm trying to do. Also from the 4th, Belgrade refugees make a break for the Hungarian border. So, of course, the refugee crisis, I say it still hasn't played as deep a problem as it's going to play, which is why I want to keep reminding people that what Jesus said was, you'll see wars, rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be earthquakes and famines and pestilences in diverse places. But don't be alarmed at that. The end is not yet. So I want to keep reminding people, I think that's where we're at. So the refugee crisis still in the front pages, and they're promising us now with these final push to get ISIS out of Mosul and Aleppo, that it's going to have tens of thousands of innocent people, but the fleeing of tens of thousands, if not more, innocent people trying to get out of harm's way. And so it's going to give us another push right in time for Christmas, probably, with refugees and problems. Putin scraps plutonium disposal deal with unfriendly U.S. Everybody knows about that story. That's been touted as, part of our, Russian aggression. So it just shows, of course, the division. Nobody talking about how we're working together on issues, and nobody's going to go to war, and nobody's going to push nuclear buttons. It's not. Assad can't be worth that. How bad was everything 5 years ago that it's worth nuclear war? So nobody even points that out in the media. It's all about getting into the moment of building up to war. UN chief demands impartial probe into Yemen attack. If you want to know, if you're a Christian out there and wants to do some good in the world, I've often thought if I became aimless, pointless in my life, boy, there's always Yemen. These poor people, like Afghanistan, are, just innocent people trying to live their lives as they have for hundreds of years, perhaps, these cultures, and they're just being destroyed. Same people that went after Syria, it's a lot of Christians coming out of Syria running from these bombs, Christians being displaced all over that Middle East, real Orthodox Christians, not the kind you see, worshiping movie stars necessarily, but people living in a whole different cultural recognition of what Christianity means. And they're at the brunt end of a lot of this. We've even, even our mainstream media has made the point through, John Kerry of all people, the genocide, Christian genocide, that was a big topic when we wanted to get all mad at ISIS. But where's the story following up? How come we never stop these 30,000 fighters? When we can send almost that many into yearly routine drills around the world. Okay, so anyway, UN chief demands impartial probe into Yemen attack because there's such a humanitarian outcry. 100 and something killed at one time during the funeral, 140 people they're reporting. And if anywhere shows some actual, you look at the pictures, boy, you see paper all over the ground. You see what looks like smoke still hanging in the air like you did after 9/11. You see, people carted off on stretchers being carried by people yelling and frantic looking faces. And it just, I don't know if this is a set. They're just all a bunch of better actors than what we get for Orlando or the Sandy hoax shooting. You know, people just sort of standing around, ambulances showing up late. You know, you supposedly got all these kids shot and killed in there. There's no blood on anybody from picking up these poor kids that might be partially breathing or anything. It's just, so, you know, here it just looks a little more authentic. Perhaps it's not. I don't trust them. But what I'm saying is, if there's anywhere where they're actually killing people, and they don't talk about it much, you know, Yemen, these Houthi rebels, which are, again, very traditional people, like in Afghanistan, because they can't have, you know, real indigenous cultures. They won't stand for, you know, an electronic banking system that's based on nothing, you know, your rulers meting out to you the sort of life, telling you what you can do and where you can do it, what your resources will be used for and how. They won't stand for it. They'd rather die. And these people that are, you know, making their play through this Third World War for the next phase of human existence on the planet, they know that. They know that the Native Americans weren't going to stand for the American colonialists, you know, spreading across their land and just chopping down every tree they wanted, raping every woman they wanted, stealing every resource they wanted. You know, the Native American culture just wasn't going to, you couldn't give them enough beads for that. And so you had to destroy them. And same thing with the Aborigines of Australia, the Carib Indians, when butchers like Christopher Columbus, pirates actually, I mean, he was a captain, so he probably didn't have to do the butchering. He sent the butchers out for him, but he was a pirate, no doubt. And that whole mission was a mission of piracy that we call the, you know, founding of America. What an atrocity. It was the beginning of genocides in both North America, South America. Well, South America had already been going on, but it just accelerated through those Caribbean islands and such. I mean, that's the real history of the world that you just don't learn in school. You know, that's what I finally realized, how school is something that no one should, you know, oh, they're in school. Oh, I can't wait to send my kid to school. Are you kidding? You know, why? Indoctrinated into lies that make them nothing but slaves in a system that already has a predetermined end. This money system based on, you know, nothing. First, you know, based on a house of cards called fractional reserve, then gold as just a farce, because of course that couldn't be maintained, but it was enough to get countries sucked in at Bretton Woods for 25 years. And then, you know, this petrodollar system with the Arabs that made you know, certain Arabs our best buddies and have to control that world for the last 50 years. You know, that could never go on, this inflation of money, the way they've done it. You know, that always had to transfer into something else. Just like after World War I at Bretton Woods, it transferred from the English pound being backed by silver to the US dollar promised to be backed by gold. But 25 years later, when they were called on it, they had to jump off that gold standard. Nixon had to put us temporarily on hold. You couldn't redeem your money for gold anymore, and never have been able to since. Not until it became part of the market now, and it went up to $1,000, and you know, from $35 an ounce. That's all the U.S. dollars that were supposed to be in circulation. That was the original agreement with how many nations at Bretton Woods signed on for this agreement that, okay, we'll make the dollar the central unit of currency for the world on the conditions that anyone can redeem it for gold at $35 at any time. That keeps it honest, you know. So for 25 years, everybody bought and sold on that deal until de Gaulle said, "Wait a minute, okay, now I got 25 years worth of dollars piled up. And you've had 25 years worth of wine and cheese and, bad French engineering. But, you've gotten hard goods for that currency, which now is worth a lot less in the world I see, because you printed so many dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and redeem all those dollars for the gold that, you promised I could. So that set off this chain of events that we are today, which was always going to be the bursting finally of this bubble. And I'm just trying to get people to see certain people have known that's coming and are playing that like a casino game, right? You're playing it as far as you can until the next phase. And I say what we need to realize is that next phase is what is going into effect. That's the wars and rumors of wars phase. It's bringing about this change. But the change, I don't think, is going to be World War tomorrow. That's part where I hope people that are listening to me are getting something a little different out of my presentation. So then you got the Philippines. This is an article from the 8th. The Duterte orders U.S. forces out after 65 years. Don't treat us like a doormat. Okay, that's all. We can talk about that in a minute. I say that's all staged, but it's part of this drawn up new lines for the coming war. Russia says can protect its Syria assets. So that's good news, right, Americans? Russia pointing out it can protect its Syria assets if we carpet bomb, if the U.S. carpet bombs. Why are they worried about the U.S. carpet? Why are these poor people who are having to run from this country? What is so valuable in taking out Assad this way? Carpet bombing. Okay. Because we saw how good that worked in places like Vietnam. U.S. Britain weigh new sanctions on Russia, but have the old ones worked, right? So what kind of additional pressure can we put to hurt those people so that they can't think about, any solution but going to war finally? I mean, that's what I read in that. That's from October 20th. From the 19th, U.S. warns overwhelming response to any North Korean use of nukes. So, not only have I spoken about North Korea being, string being obviously pulled. I mean, if we can control Iran for the past 20 years, we could break Russia 20 years ago, and I argue that's why we're in control of Russia building up their weapons over the last 20 years. But we can't control for the last 50 years, since our fingers have been over there in North Korea and all of Indochina, Vietnam and all of that. Since we've had all of that going on for 50 years, instead North Korea is the guy that's rattling his saber. Watch out, I might just send nukes. I might just respond first. That makes a lot of sense. So we're now warning of overwhelming response. So again, that's good news. No diplomacy there, just a promise of military response. I find the fact that the U.S. has to be so strong through the media about North Korea, and so much media hype over North Korea that, for me, there's only one way that can be seen with all the important issues in the world, what's really going on that I'll talk about here after these headlines. I just feel like, we got to see that as the wool being pulled over our eyes, and nothing more than, unfortunately, an excuse to go to war whenever we decide, even to wipe out people like they did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki the same way in Korea. I mean, I imagine that's at the bottom of these North Korean defectors, if there are such a thing that they talk about in the media. Is, people are saying, man, I'm seeing what they're printing in the paper. These guys are going to bomb us into oblivion one of these days. So anyway, I hope that's not the plan and it's just scare hype. But, how could you feel comfortable being anywhere near a country like that when the modern hype is war, and they're talking about your country as being the instigator of nuclear war? Philippines, Duterte says goodbye to U.S. ties in Beijing. So he went to China and made best friends with China, and they're going to work out their deal in the South China Seas. And so, again, being such a small country, I'll deal with that, and he's part of my 7 things I think are, stand out to me right now as going on and bringing about, the war that's coming. So the Philippines is certainly one of them in the headlines. EU drops sanctions threat against Russia over Syria. So here you see a divide from U.S. policy. The EU, the economic pressure there, I mean, it makes you wonder, how divided are they going to get in the end? Some siding with Russia, you're going to get that divide again. Germany and France and England going at each other again. France and England on one side, Germany on the other, or will it be England against, anyway, I see the seeds of that, because I believe divide and conquer, order out of chaos, those are the archetypes that you use. And Machiavelli's archetype of using every means, but never allowing the mass of people to be united against you, to hate you enough to prefer anything to your rule. And so it always has to be pointed somewhere else. And that's why the bankers and the Rothschilds, nobody ever really brings it back to an end game that makes any sense, as if the one family is having their way with the world. They don't have to worry about anybody against them, or the central bankers, as if it's a group of 12 people that gets together and decides on the fate of the world. No, their money has infiltrated the whole world for at least a couple of 100 years that you can track. And seeing how that money is going toward a plan, and it isn't just to make money with more banks, is what I think. And I'm going to talk about that this week in an end times trending perspective on the banking. So I won't spend the time with it here. Hopefully you'll tune in for that. But anyway, I see division coming here. Russia, of course, having a lot of trade in different countries of Europe. And so the EU as a unified group can't do anything against Russia, because Russia's got allies in Europe economically, financially. Newsweek from the 22nd, why the Iran-Russia relationship is so uneasy. Iranian politicians say they treat Russia with deep suspicion. I think that this, it is, of course, pure propaganda, but this is for the benefit of the brainwashed U.S. audience. This isn't the kind of thing that Russia and Iran print toward each other. Why the Iran-Russia relationship is so uneasy. The point seems to be this. In contrast, reading from this article briefly, Russia and Iran are direct rivals in the global energy market, and gas and oil revenues are crucial to the budgets of both countries. Hence, it is hardly surprising that for many years, Russia and Iran have failed to agree on the division of Caspian Sea resources. So the point I believe we're supposed to get is they're cooperating militarily, but they're also rivals. They're just both on the same side against in keeping the Assad regime and their Shiite Muslim regime intact. Interests in Syria that are financial and strategic. Iran's Syria and the stability of Lebanon and the places where it has its Shia stronghold. But that beyond their shared need to keep what's being threatened alive, that they each are won't necessarily be unhappy to see the other one deteriorate. But there's been no, if you notice, there's been no aggression. They don't point to any real aggression between the two. The fact they haven't agreed how to divide the resource, they've obviously been dividing it, and they haven't gone to war over it. We've never even heard about any Russian aggression against Iran over oil and gas. So, again, pure propaganda for U.S. ears. This is from the 24th of October, from the U.S. Philippines Duterte sparking distress around the world. So, I won't even comment on that except to remind you that that's what I've been promising all of this really means. It's not, none of it's necessarily true. It's just that what it really means is never what they're telling you. It's the deeper picture is that what is coming, and what you're supposed to feel is fear. You're supposed to know who your enemies are, who you can trust and who you can't. It's funny how this week I saw something about Hitler and how he was praised as Times Man of the Year, because what did he do? He printed his own currency that wasn't backed by the central banks. They didn't have to, the country didn't have to pay any interest to anyone to borrow the money to rebuild Germany. He simply printed the money, and Germany's economy started flourishing, and that's what made him such a Times Man of the Year. Imagine that. When Saddam Hussein tried to sell oil in euros, right, he was hung. When Gaddafi tried to create a central bank of Africa and make money exchangeable in gold, he was dragged through the streets and raped and killed. So that's what they think of that. And yet, tell me Hitler wasn't, either a great man that's been destroyed or an inside man that did a job. And they did it by what they knew would work, of course. Don't pay money to the central bank. That'll make the financial system strong. That'll make the economy strong. And the people will love the leader that did that. So that's a good way to put somebody in power if you're in the position to do that. It's unlikely you'd allow that to continue when you look at their record of assassinating people. I mean, they tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson in 19 or something like that? 1830s, perhaps? Because he wouldn't let the bank back in after the first bank got thrown out, and they had to fight the War of 1812 over it. He wouldn't let or maybe it was the second bank then that he defeated. I don't remember my history exactly, but there were two Bank of the United States funded by these Rothschilds that come in to run America. And the first one lost its charter. It was in before the 1800s, 1791, I guess, because it was a 20-year charter. And in 1811, the Congress said no. Or maybe it was from 1794, and they just said they weren't going to renew it in 1814 or when it was up for renewal. Anyway, that's what brought on the War of 1812, and they went into debt and had to allow a second bank. And I think it was Andrew Jackson that defeated that, and they tried to kill him. But as the story goes, the assassin, both his muskets misfired. Right? It reminded me of the story of Gideon when he said, make the floor dry and the fleece wet. And then the fleece dry and the floor wet, so he could know that God could do these miraculous things. It made me think, did that powder suddenly get wet in there and misfire? And that's what saved Jackson's life. But, they've been killing every president all over the world, not just American presidents. The Indonesian president attached his money to gold in the 60s, I believe it was, and they killed him. So you just don't get to do it, period. And yet you have these 7 or 8 countries left in the world, which are the ones that we've either gone to, like Iraq and and Libya, or that we're at war with now, Iran, Somalia, Venezuela is one of the countries that isn't on this central banking system out of Switzerland, this International Monetary Fund. Russia is, China is, for those of you who don't think their strings are being pulled. But these other countries aren't. And so I say that's, they've been, England and America have been in that Middle East. England for 100 years, they set up Wahhabism in the Kingdom of Saud to defeat or keep the Hashemites busy. They eventually did assassinate. Somebody assassinated the Hashemites, got in under them, drove the Hashemites off to Jordan to then have to take refuge as the Hashemite king of Jordan, funded by the same people, by the money now to stay alive. So if you don't think they've been getting their way in the Middle East, I don't see how it's any other, the whole petrodollar system that let America steal the world's wealth the last 40 years. How'd that happen? If these Arabs, weren't under some form of control. So I say it's been set up that they've been left there, these 7-8 countries that aren't under the monetary system, that gives something on the ground to be argued over, something to really fight about for the bankers. Lieberman seems to say on the 24th, Israel's next Gaza war will be one. So I just brought this up here today. I didn't even get to read this. But the first line says, Israel's next war with Gaza militants would be their last one, quote, because we will completely destroy them. But added, he remains committed to a two-state solution. Yeah, we want them to have their state, just like they wanted the Native Americans to have their country still on these little reservations and alcoholics. So again, these are signs of what's coming. I hope that I haven't gone too long today, but I really want to sum it up with the 7 things that I believe are important out of this that I've noted. Turkey's new maps are reclaiming the Ottoman Empire. That's from yesterday. It's one I want to pay some attention to later this week in an End Times Trending or next week about this whole struggle for the new caliphate that's coming. But just keep that in mind, that it's come out in the paper already, or come out in the FP, don't know who that is, but Turkey's new maps are reclaiming the Ottoman Empire. And lastly, I had this one also from yesterday. Moscow confirms ministry website attack after U.S. hacker claim. And that'll bring me to my 7 things that I think you should be paying attention to now with regard to World War III on the horizon. And the first then being the saber rattling with Russia, and then all right down now to the cyber attack, which has been planted for at least a year. It was China and Russia, right? China and Russia are 2 great enemies. And what do they represent? The possible alternative to the petrodollar system, right? They're the possible alternative. That's why the euro had to be broken. The euro can't be seen as a possible alternative. It's going to fall or throw in. It either has to throw in as some sort of group, maybe Germany, and maybe that's what breaks Germany off and gets them with Russia and China in the Great War, is that economically, Germany represents all the strength of Europe financing and Europe investment and Europe money. So if they were to say, yeah, okay, the US dollar's doomed, we're going to throw in with this new BRIC system, that's something that could help bring the world to war as well. But the first thing, you got the saber rattling with Russia over the Ukraine, over Russia aggression, putting all the bombs on their front door, the NATO countries, and now the hacker attack, basically blaming each other for attacks, or we're even claiming we're attacking them, but blaming them for attacking us. You got number 2 would be the fact that I've seen in articles, so I didn't bring it up this week, building these fancy new weapons. We got a new ship apparently that's our newest in stealth Navy technology. It's supposed to be out like around 2020, right? So again, in a world that's and supposed to be committed to a world without war and conflict, it really desperately needs the money to go towards something other than military and new expensive high-tech weaponry. And who are we using them on if the people that are our true enemies are Iran, that doesn't have a single nuclear weapon, North Korea, are they really that big a threat? Right? So it's got to be this China and Russia. And I say, where's Russia? Why have they been allowed to build this sort of military over the last 20 years when we didn't let Iran do it? We didn't let Japan and Germany rearm after World War II. Not until they became NATO allies, and then they get NATO-approved weaponry, but they don't have any nationalistic aims to use that against anyone else, nor the ability, theoretically, to point those weapons anywhere that NATO doesn't tell them. But in the same 20 years that Russia was dead broke, everybody feeling sorry for them, Iran was a strong country coming out of a revolution in which they were theoretically so strong they could pick their leader and nothing the world could do about it. They're able to stand as a unified group that's just claimed they can get 9 million soldiers together. So, that's, you can certainly get rid of ISIS with 9 million, can't you? So anyway, building more and newer weapons is what I think a real sign as to our future. Why would you be doing that if you had the money and the power to start turning that down and showing how great you were for being able to turn that down? Which they could if they weren't having gun shows, on a global scale where you're showing things like tanks and missile launchers and such to countries to go into debt to buy to fight wars with other countries that you've similarly given weapon to, or that your twin brother Russia has been, red team, blue team. The red team's been supplying weapons to their enemies, so now you're the blue team, you go supply them on the other side. Why would you support a world like that over the last 20 years if you didn't mean to come to war at some point? Number 5, you look at the things like France right now, the real terrorism scare, the police feel unsafe, huh? The police are marching through the streets talking about we feel unsafe. I mean, that seems very staged to me. We know France is under direct control, like America, of the mouthpieces. So I think that's staged. Police know that it's a dangerous job. They don't march and say, we're afraid, we're afraid, we're afraid. We want more money. It's all to divide people, because France is traditionally a very strong country, very liberal, very capable of saying no, very capable of getting in the streets and making the kind of noise that their leaders don't like. So I think this is, it just shows where we're getting to, that even within France now, we know we got these right wing in places like Germany, the left wing Angela Merkel saying we got to do the right thing, which she is. She's towing that sort of, she's the only reasonable one as far as what they're showing me in the media, saying, how can we undermine the very thing that makes us a liberal society? Don't we have to let these people in, find them work, integrate them, love them like Christians? I mean, isn't that what we'd have to do? Where you got Christians over in Hungary saying, hey, it's our right to keep them out. Yeah. Not as a Christian, though that's what he claims. It's their right as a Hungarian to say my nationalism is above my Christianity, that's for sure. It's their right to do that, and they're exercising that. It's one of these signs I want to include under number 5 here. The way that the European countries are being divided right now. And that leads me to number 4, the use of media to divide people, which I primarily think of in my own world, where I'm more familiar with the media, dividing us through ISIS terrorism, which is, of course, all fake. Gun control, which ever since that, like the peace process that's brought nothing but war, destruction, and death, the gun control has brought nothing but booming gun sales for the gun industry. I predict that will go on, both the rhetoric and the booming sales. Pressure on Christians, right now through the media to sort of have to stand this, absurd abuse that everything that's got to do with their faith now is suddenly illegal and offensive to everyone. when, the whole idea of America and Britain and this Western world was built on the idea, if not the miracle of Jesus raising from the dead, at least Christian values. That's what they called them over the years. So that, at what point does Christianity become a culprit in a country whose very existence, all the freedoms that allow everyone else, like a Satanist or an atheist or anyone else, to voice their values and their platforms in the same open, free manner that the Christians get to? It's only because of Christians that that's even available anywhere in the world, theoretically. I don't want to get into who's a Christian. I just want to talk about the fact that the whole idea of these liberties are based upon what used to be called Christian values, that there's some inalienable rights that come with being a human, and those can't be designated through anybody's religion or adherence to any state laws or anything else. You got to let a person be free to say what they want to say, what's in their heart to say. And so it's really absurd that at this moment what's happening in America is that they're using this division of people over the fact that to do that now is offensive and therefore should be outlawed. And it starts primarily with Christians, because separation of church and state. Christians shouldn't be allowed to be Christians anywhere where the state has authority. Only the state only has authority because Christian values gave the state authority to vote for such things. And now apparently they're voting to, not allow any sort of Christian speech to be seen or heard anywhere where the state has any authority. And if it is, of course, then everybody else has to be seen and heard at the same time. That's what's bringing up the contention. Because the Christian answer is simply, well, sure. I mean, it's always been the case that if Satanists want to have an after-school, project, they can. The fact that only Christian after-school projects are all over the country kind of show you that it was Christians that founded all the state institutions and ensured that they would be free to not only have Christian speech, but every other kind of speech. So the fact that they're turning that on their ear right now, same thing with race, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Unborn Lives Matter, all this division over something that should be, those airwaves could easily be used to promote unity, and they're not. This fabricated gender mania. There's always been transgender, cross-dressing, gender identifying homosexuality throughout all time that we're aware of. Always has been there. Never had to be a mania that took down the society in which it existed until now. Number 3 to me is this newest craze called disaster preparedness, right? Crisis actors, disaster preparedness. Everybody, every military has got disaster preparedness drills. Every state agency, FEMA, everybody. Jade Helm, for all we know, was a giant disaster preparedness drill. I mean, they say they were there to practice, what they might need to do. I mean, we've always known there's always a potential for war. We're in a peace process. Why do we need ever increasing drills of war preparedness unless what our strategists are telling us is, hey, these policies we have are going to lead to a war. It's probably going to be with these people first in this sort of territory. Okay, we better practice that kind of war in those kind of scenarios because we know it's coming, is what I want people to see. And apparently we know disease is coming, we know famine and pestilence are also coming, which is, again, just what Jesus said would be this before the end. The end is not yet. So that's why I say we're not there yet, but you can be sure that their disaster preparedness isn't a waste of money. They're preparing for when the stuff happens. They can calculate, okay, this big of an earthquake or this big of a bomb dropped over this large of an area, this big of a flood affecting X amount of people. How many vaccines do I need to prepare? How many rescue workers? How many, what else would you be practicing to get your numbers so that when the real thing starts going down, you can utilize your resources most effectively? I think next, I guess I've been counting forward and backwards. The first thing was the saber rattling with Russia. The second thing was building more and newer weapons. The third thing is what's going on with France and all over Europe with this division of people and ones that want to show tolerance versus the ones that have no tolerance. The constant spread of the threat of terrorism making even the police afraid. The fourth thing, the way the media is being used, not to calm fears, not to bring people together, but to divide them and show where the future divisions need to lie. The fifth thing is the newest craze called disaster preparedness. The sixth thing is that you've got things like navies crossing the planet. Now, that's not cheap. They carry a lot of people that have to be fed and paid. The fuel alone, the whole idea that Russia's sending its navy to different parts of the world, we're sending our navy to different parts, China's sending its navy. These things don't bode well for the near future. Not the future war. It could be that they're putting pieces in place that will then stay in those regions. That's my suspicion right now. But it also doesn't bode well for things like what just happened in Yemen. And the Strait of Hormuz problem with Iran, it gives more potential for flare-ups that lead toward the Great War. So anyway, it seems like nations are choosing sides right now. That's where the Philippine sort of distraction, provocation comes in. This idea that they're switching sides and now is a strategic location militarily, financially. All these things now are going to create another problem in the world. And when the chips are down now, if that comes in this near future where fighting starts breaking out and military bases need to be occupied and used or readied to be used, all of a sudden the Philippines is going to say, okay, Russia, okay, China, set up your guns here. So that's what's being shown to us right now with the movement and the dividing up of countries along these different lines. India being divided up, Pakistan. Everybody's got to be divided up into the group that they're eventually going to fall into. That, I think, is very important. And the last thing is the way Bibi responded, President Netanyahu of Israel, to the UNESCO claim, which is just on top of all the even the United Nations, which is, of course, a body of nations. The U.S. always goes with Israel, vetoes anything about Israel. But as a body of human beings and nations looking on, they've cited the state of Israel as the most offensive, with the most violations. All the rest of the nations combined don't add up to the United Nations resolutions against the state of Israel for their human rights violations, their oppression, their constant pushing on this land, pushing forward to get more and to do it through their Mossad's slogan, through deceit. Thou will make war. So UNESCO finally, most recently, puts it on record, yes, they're oppressors and they need to stop this. So what's the move of the Zionists? To come out and say, yeah, let's start getting ready to build our new temple. This is what I find really invigorating in my own watch. It's what I've been watching for the last couple of years, and saying that this is the watch from an eschatological point for me. 7-year commitment by the Hashemite king to say, yeah, build that thing next to the Dome of the Rock, because the Jews have already said that they can do it next to the Dome of the Rock. At least in their mind, the Zionist mind, it can be the first move, the first phase. They might have ideas to tear down the Dome of the Rock eventually, but they've already agreed they can build the temple next to the Dome of the Rock. And so all it really needs is some sort of deal to be struck, something ratified in the world. I don't think it can happen while you still got fight with ISIS and all these divisions, what's going on in Egypt, what's going on in Libya, all these countries going broke. They need a leader. We've been predicting that since the Arab Spring, that all of this was to pave the way for the good caliphate to rise, this white horse of revelation, given a crown of honor. You be our leader because you're a good guy, you're a religious guy, you want it for the good of others, for the whole Muslim community, not just yourself. That's what I'm waiting to see. You'll know if I'm right in the years to come as we get close to that. But yeah, that's what I think are the 7 things. And now that last thing becomes very important as officially Netanyahu comes out and has made a move toward the Temple Mount by saying, let's go get ready to start building our temple over there. Tell me that that's not my holy site. So I say it was UNESCO's prompting. Remember, it's red team, blue team. That's how they play it. Hegelian dialectic: problem, reaction, solution. Problem, UNESCO's saying you guys are terrorists and you just want to tear down the Muslims and tear down their Al-Aqsa Mosque and build your temple. Reaction, hey, we got a right to that land too. Get over there. Let's start building our temple. Screw that UN. We don't care what they say. Solution, hey, what if we all make a deal and just share that mount? Hey, what if we put the temple next to the mosque and we all agree to just share the damn place instead and make friends with one another? How would that work? Right? So that's the future I see coming. And anyway, that's the report this week. World War III this week. Talk to you again soon. Thanks for being here.